On that July evening in 2006, a patrol officer arrived at a house on the outskirts of Flint, Michigan. In the kitchen, amid scattered shards of dishware and traces of blood, lay two bodies, a man and a young woman. Traces of semen were found on the woman's palms. Between them lay a close, incomprehensible connection, one that no one spoke of. 114 Woodmont Street stood deep in a neighborhood that always smelled of hot asphalt and gasoline in the summer. It was a quiet, working-class neighborhood with identical gray houses built in the 1960s. The Rose family, father and daughter, lived there. Neighbors knew them little, seeing them only occasionally at the gas station or the local supermarket. They kept to themselves, rarely speaking to others. Her father, Richard Rose, worked as a mechanic in a private workshop. He was about 50, a robust man with a rugged face and a tired look. After his wife's death, he withdrew and stopped going to church. His daughter, Linda, 25, worked as a saleswoman but often took sick leave. At school, she was remembered as quiet and withdrawn, the kind of person who tries not to attract attention. Neighbors said that after the mother's death, something seemed to change between father and daughter. They often sat together on the veranda, not speaking. Sometimes in the evenings, muffled screams could be heard coming from the house, but no one intervened. The neighborhood was accustomed to noise. Old houses, alcoholics, arguments, all of this was considered normal. Police records show that a local police officer was called to the house in 2003. A neighbor reported that Linda had allegedly run outside in her robe, screaming that she couldn't take it anymore. When the officer arrived, Richard attributed the incident to a family dispute. Linda denied any violence. The case was closed. She subsequently stopped leaving the house. A courier delivered her groceries, and the windows were covered with thick curtains. An old "Do Not Disturb" sign hung on the mailbox. Her employer reported that Linda rarely called, sometimes citing illness as her reason for absence. A classmate with whom she kept in touch told investigators that a year before the tragedy, Linda complained about her father's obsessive control. "He wants to know where I am, who I'm with, even when I'm sleeping," she said. Her friend dismissed this as the usual jealousy of an elderly parent. The apartment was immaculately clean. Everything had its place, from the mugs on the shelf to the framed photographs. A portrait of his late mother, Mary Rose, who died of heart failure, hung in the center of the living room. Since then, according to neighbors, Richard became a different person. He rarely drank, but when he did, he'd disappear for days, return late, and the house would be silent the next day. Some neighbors said the father and daughter slept in the same room. This was never officially confirmed. But during a search of the house, investigators found only one bed. The postman recalled that Linda would occasionally peer out the window, but never open the door. She had the look of a prisoner, he said. Since the spring of 2006, tension between them had become noticeable. Neighbors heard bangs, screams, and the sounds of falling objects. Someone once called the police, but Richard again claimed nothing happened. The girl appeared tearful, but denied making any threats. According to testimony, she soon stopped wearing jewelry and short sleeves. Co-workers at the store recalled bruises on her wrists. No one knew what was going on at home. No one asked. By July, their home was almost completely isolated. Neighbors hadn't seen Linda for 2 weeks. On the evening of July 17th, lights came on in the windows, followed by the sharp sound of a gunshot. An hour later, police surrounded the house. Back then, no one knew that this was no ordinary family tragedy. It was a case that shocked even seasoned investigators, a story in which family boundaries ceased to exist long before death. After her mother's funeral in 2001, the Roses' home changed. From a cozy space, it began to resemble a closed system where every sound, step, and glance mattered. There were no guests, the phone didn't ring, and the television was kept at a low volume. Linda spent almost all her time at home. Her father said that the world outside is too dirty, and over time, she stopped arguing. Richard gradually began to replace everything she was losing in her outside life. He drove her to work, managed her schedule, read her messages, and checked her email. Linda tried to resist, but her resistance only provoked outbursts of irritation. He didn't yell or hit her, he simply stared, long and silent, as if expecting her submission. She later described this look to a friend as suffocating. When their relationship went beyond family, it was impossible to pinpoint the moment. It didn't happen suddenly. It all happened as part of a routine breakdown. Touches, conversations about trust, late-night conversations where he complained he couldn't sleep without her. He called her the only person left. According to evidence from her personal notes, later found in a dresser drawer. The first hints of addiction appeared as early as 2003. She wrote that there are no boundaries in the house and there is nowhere to escape. By that point, Linda was barely interacting with her colleagues. She seemed tired at work and frequently asked for time off. When her boss once offered to help, Linda responded curtly, "If I leave, he won't be able to handle it." Neighbors recalled that they sometimes went out onto the veranda together. He would place a cup of coffee in front of her while he drank beer and smoked. They didn't speak. It seemed they had an unspoken agreement not to look each other in the eye for more than a few seconds. Police later discovered that in 2004, Richard had granted his daughter power of attorney over a portion of her property. This was explained as his desire to leave everything to the family. But in reality, the document increased his control. Any attempt by Linda to change jobs, move out, or meet someone was met with fierce resistance. Starting in early 2005, he began forbidding her from going out in the evenings. If she was late, he called dozens of times. One day, a colleague gave her a ride after her shift. The next day, she came home with a busted lip. No one reported it to the police. According to investigators, Linda began keeping a diary during those years. Her handwriting is nervous, the lines are tight, and there are spaces between words, as if she was short of air. In one entry from March 2005, she writes, "He says he'll go crazy without me. If I leave, he'll do something terrible. Sometimes I think he already has." At the end of that year, she stopped writing altogether. Papers found later ended with the phrase, "I can't figure out which of us is to blame." People around them noted strange details. They dressed similarly, bought identical clothes, and wore rings on their ring fingers. When a neighbor once asked Linda why she didn't date men, she replied, "I don't need to. I have a family." In the spring of 2006, the sounds of arguing in the house became increasingly frequent. Neighbors heard thuds and the sound of furniture falling. One day, Linda ran out into the street barefoot, wearing only a shirt. A passerby stopped her, but she only said, "He won't let go." A few minutes later, her father followed her out, took her hand, and led her back. No one called the police. Gradually, Richard's behavior began to show signs of paranoia. He installed locks on interior doors, checked telephones, and destroyed letters. According to forensic experts, when the house was inspected after the tragedy, almost all the windows were boarded up from the inside. In June, they stopped going outside altogether. A neighbor recalled seeing Linda for the last time a week before the murder. She was standing by the window as if waiting for someone. A candle burned on the windowsill. This was the stage when their connection was no longer a secret between them alone. It had become a vicious circle where fear and attachment intertwined to the point of indistinguishability. Any attempt to break free was perceived as a betrayal. And in this house, where everything had once begun in silence, the inevitable denouement was already brewing. July 17, 2006, began like an ordinary summer Monday. At 5 in the morning, the lights came on in a house on Woodmont Street. Neighbors accustomed to the quiet remarked that this was a rarity. Usually, the windows of this house remained dark even during the day. Richard woke up before his daughter. He turned on the coffee maker, took a bottle of beer from the fridge, and set it next to his mug. A stack of letters lay on the table, all without envelopes. Among them was a single sheet of paper written in Linda's hand. The words were uneven, streaked with smudged ink. "Dad, I want to leave." According to the investigation, the first conflict between them occurred around 8:30 a.m. A neighbor from the house across the street saw a man run out onto the porch, scream, and then return, loudly slamming the door. Soon, a shadow flickered behind the curtains, probably Linda. She tried to leave, but the door was blocked from the inside by an additional deadbolt installed by Richard himself. According to forensic testimony, the house that morning was in a state of disarray, uncharacteristic of its usual cleanliness. There were spilled coffee stains on the living room floor, a broken mug, and a shoe print leading to the bedroom. The forensic experts concluded that the conflict lasted at least 40 minutes. Around 10 in the morning, Richard called his friend from work. The conversation was short and disjointed. He said, "She doesn't understand who I am to her anymore." Then he hung up. An hour later, the phone was disconnected. Linda had tried to go outside that day, as determined by fingerprints on the inside of the doorknob and footprints on the rug. Her bag and car keys were found in the kitchen. The car was parked outside the house, untouched. Witnesses reported that someone turned on loud music at midday. For an hour, the monotonous sound of an old tape recorder could be heard from the house. Linda Ronstadt's Blue Bayou on a loop. This coincided with the time when, according to investigators, Richard consumed a large amount of alcohol. His blood alcohol level was later found to be 0.17 parts per thousand ppm, the level considered highly intoxicating. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the first shot rang out. Neighbors thought it was a firecracker. Only a few minutes later did someone call the police. When officers arrived, the door was locked. Through the window, they saw a woman's body on the kitchen floor. A man was sitting nearby, pressed against the wall, holding a pistol. According to the official report, Linda died from a gunshot wound to the chest, fired from a distance of less than 1 meter. A second shot was fired into Richard's temple. Both shots were fired from the same gun, registered to him. Investigators found photographs on the table. Each one depicted them together, father and daughter at a picnic, in the living room, at dinner. All the photos had been carefully cut out of old albums. A note lay nearby. "Now, we are together again." The FBI became involved due to possible signs of violence and prolonged psychological restraint. No signs of a struggle were found on Linda's body, only old bruises and contusions. A forensic analysis showed that death was instantaneous. The house was thoroughly searched. There were handprints on the walls, traces of blood in the kitchen, and broken bottles on the floor. The bedroom contained only one bed, 2 pillows, and 2 glasses on the nightstand. The windows were boarded up from the inside. A video recording from a neighboring yard, released 2 days later, shows Linda standing by the window an hour before the murder. She was holding a phone, then dropped it on the floor and stepped back. At that moment, a man's silhouette appeared behind her. When the police forced the door open, the house was thick with the smell of alcohol and burning. A pot of burnt food lay on the stove. On the floor were bare footprints leading from the bedroom to the kitchen. In the trash can, they found scraps of paper, part of a letter in which Linda had written, "I'm afraid of what he'll do if I leave." Both were pronounced dead at 5:42 p.m. Neighbors gathered outside the house remained silent. One officer later said, "We've seen plenty of tragedies, but in this house, it felt like someone had been waiting a long time for the end." After the examination, the body was transported to the county morgue. Photographs show Linda's arms folded across her chest, as if someone had positioned them after death. Richard's body bears a gunshot wound. The house was sealed off. A sign was posted on the door, "Crime scene, do not enter." A week later, only one woman came in, my mother's former friend. She stood by the gate, stared at the windows for a long time, and told the police officer he promised he'd never let her go, and he kept his promise. On the morning of July 18th, the Roses' home was surrounded by tape and journalists. Cameras captured everything: the broken window, the drops of blood on the steps, the gray police line tape. An investigative team was working inside. The atmosphere was suffocating. The smell of iron, overheated wood, and alcohol mixed into a thick, oppressive atmosphere. Investigators began with photographs. Each photo was dated on the back. All were taken in different years, but in all of them, they were sitting close together, almost identically. He closer, she slightly apart, with an empty gaze. FBI analysts would later note a recurring pattern of the man's possessive posture. Forensic experts collected fingerprints. Only his fingers were on the gun. Linda's body showed signs of old injuries, bruises and contusions, consistent with being grabbed. The forensic report stated, "Evidence of systematic physical abuse, not related to the date of death." Videotapes were found in the bedroom. Most were blank, but 2 contained recordings from a home security camera. One showed Linda preparing breakfast, while a man sat at the table, watching her without saying a word. The camera was on a tripod preset. The second tape cut out, and a voice was heard saying, "Look at me, tell me your mind." Then there was noise and silence. An FBI psychological evaluation described Richard's behavior as boundary control, a rare condition in which the object of one's addiction is perceived as part of one's self. They concluded that in recent months, he realized the relationship was spiraling out of control and perceived his daughter's possible departure as a personal annihilation. The autopsy confirmed that Linda hadn't resisted. There were no defensive wounds on her face, only a slight bruise under her left eye, likely from a blow shortly before her death. After the report's publication, the press dubbed the case "The House Where Boarders Disappeared." News reports featured the house, its boarded-up windows, and quotes from the girl's diary. Journalists attempted to locate relatives, but those closest to them refused to comment. The police archives contain a recording by the duty officer, which was later read out during recruit training. They lived next to us for 10 years. No one noticed how it started. When we entered, it was already over. The house was full of silence, as if it had been waiting for us from the very beginning. After the investigation, the house on Woodmont Street stood empty for nearly 2 years. The windows were boarded up, the grass was knee-high, and the mailbox was overflowing with advertisements. On rainy nights, neighbors reported hearing footsteps from inside, but no one investigated. The neighborhood tried to forget. The Rose case was officially closed in December 2006. The final report stated the cause was murder followed by suicide. The motive was emotional and sexual dependence between relatives, developing against a background of social isolation and the father's mental illness. Everything was presented dryly, without comment, but behind every point lay years of silent submission and fear. The FBI has kept the case materials in a closed archive under the number MI-07206. Access is restricted due to the presence of intimate recordings and photographs. Copies of the records have been distributed to psychiatric criminology training programs as an example of family absorption. The local newspaper, the Flint Daily News, published a series of articles about cases of home isolation and addiction. The journalists noted that the area had seen a surge in domestic violence calls. Residents argued in the comments section. Some called Richard a monster, others said he had gone mad from loneliness. In 2008, the house was sold at auction. The new owner, a construction company, never began renovations. Traces of old license plates and forensic marks, faded by the sun, remained on the walls. Workers said they found a metal box containing Linda's letters in the basement. The papers were damaged by moisture, but one envelope bore the inscription, "If anything happens to me, don't believe what he says." After that, the facility was finally closed. Officially, it was due to its state of disrepair. Unofficially, no one wanted to work there. Years later, psychologists involved in the investigation noted that Richard and Linda's case became emblematic of the invisible crimes taking place behind closed doors. It didn't spark major reforms or become a television show, but it left its mark in reports, in textbooks, in conversations among investigators who were encountering such extreme levels of addiction for the first time.